Hola, soy Gabriela Cámara y este podcast es parte de la celebración del 25 aniversario de Contramar. Espero que lo disfruten tanto como yo he disfrutado platicar con tanta gente tan maravillosa. Muchas gracias por estar aquí, chicos. Estamos aquí en ocasión de los 25 años de Contramar. Se me ocurrió hacer un podcast para, pues como con la idea de documentar conversaciones con personas importantes en la historia de Contramar. Contramar se ha vuelto una cosa infinitamente más grande de lo que yo jamás me imaginé cuando en 1998 decidimos, hay que hacer un restaurante de esto que comemos tan rico en la playa en la Ciudad de México, porque hay el producto, pero no hay ningún lugar donde lo puedas comer así fresco y delicioso. Y, sí, bueno, hay que hacerlo en Las Lomas, en Polanco, en La Condesa, todo estaba carísimo y dijimos, no, encontramos este localón ahí, esta bodega en la Roma, en Durango 200, y hicimos este restaurante que hoy en día va a cumplir 25 años, que es algo absolutamente
que empezó cuando teníamos 10 años todos, ¿no?
Exacto.
Yo 8.
Qué suerte que encontrábamos este lugar a las 10.
Yo 8.
Qué horror.
Pero
25 años.
25 años. Una cosa que a mí me gustaba era la idea de conversar con gente especial de Contramar. Quiero hacer 25 episodios para los 25 años.
¿Te imaginas el orgullo que sentimos nosotros, no? De estar adentro de esos 25 es casi que...
Es
una gratitud. Es una gratitud
enorme.
Pero aparte se han vuelto tan importantes. Entonces quiero, por favor, que empecemos esto con ustedes presentándose. A ver.
Bueno, ¿yo?
Pues
sí, una introducción breve.
Bueno, que soy Rodman Primac y soy un diseñador, soy galerista, tengo galería con Rudy que abrimos aquí en México hace como 4 años. Y bueno, ¿cómo lo explico? Que siempre he tenido un amor tan grande a México y una gran parte de esto siempre ha sido Contramar, que ha sido como un punto común entre todos mis amigos y todo el mundo donde yo quería estar y conocer como
un punto de referencia,
sí,
¿no?
Es como con artistas, arquitectos, diseñadores. Y lo siento por mi español, porque siempre está lleno de errores. Sí, tal vez es mejor si hablo en inglés. Pero
ya nos pasamos a inglés. Yo soy
Ahorita
Rudy.
nos pasamos a inglés.
Yo soy Rudy Weisenberg. Soy guatemalteco, pero he vivido por todos lados. Soy Rodman y yo somos gitanos, pero con muchos camiones detrás de nosotros que nos estamos mudando con cosas por todos lados. Yo produje televisión, estuve en medios de comunicación por muchos años y me tocaba mucho venir a México, a producción y a negocios, desde el 96, por ahí. Y cuando ya abre Contramar, pues se vuelve también para mí un punto muy importante de referencia.
Bueno, and I cannot think of a time or a trip that I came to Mexico City and I did not have at least one meal at Contramar, if not 2 or 3.
I know.
Which is so crazy when you think about a city that is so full of incredible food experiences and
Yes.
And is so rich with
But it's a city that has
opportunities.
evolved.
Yeah.
Because 25 years ago, 30 years ago, it wasn't the same. No? Do you agree?
Absolutely.
I mean, there were all these people trying to do projects.
Yes.
But when you moved to your restaurant, it was also considered kind of rough. I mean,
No,
right?
it was super rough. It was crazy. Everybody thought we were completely crazy.
Like no one's going to come.
And the truth of the matter that the people that came at the beginning was the art world and the media world. And it was creatives.
And it was very soon because that was my world. I didn't train as a professional chef. I didn't know anything about business. And my partner Federico Rigoletti at the time, who is an amazing chef and is much more savvy for business, also realized we needed to do something super low budget. So we, 4 of us got together and basically Federico and I made this place doing what we wanted, like a place where that was missing in the city.
And we were told that it was on a shoestring budget, right? You had a very low budget when you did it.
Very low budget.
And we get asked, because we do design always, like, what happens when you have very little money and constraint? And I think it's always a positive thing because it forces you to economize.
Totally. It forces you to focus on the
your values. It really I think the thing that's always been amazing, and you were maybe 25 years in advance of where we are a lot in food today. But now there's a lot of restaurants that are really simple and really focused on a few things and high quality and blah, 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 and I'm not so focused on, a grand experience.
Yeah.
And I think
Which becomes a grand experience.
Totally.
Exactly, but it's not about,
in a very unpretentious way.
It's about
distilling,
ingredients, and
correct.
it's about something super core. It's
Totally,
like going in
totally.
and focusing on something super core, which we're much more conscious of now.
Totally.
For me
to be just one thing about that. For me, and sorry, because I want to hear you, and now here I am gabbing away. But so for me, just one of the really interesting things about Contramar, and this is one of the reasons that I'm interested in talking to people about it, is that for now decades, people have been talking about Contramar as a phenomenon. And I just want to sort of dissect that more in actual conversations that are recorded, just because I find the subject fascinating, and I do find it fascinating that 25 years ago when I opened Contramar, I was not aiming to be number one anything. Like that's not my world. I just wanted to make a convivial space where people could eat what I wanted to eat, what I like.
Honesty maybe is a word that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Honesty in design and food and service and whatnot. And I think that honesty, even in what we do, when it's translated properly, people get it. People love that honesty because
Totally.
it's very clear and easy to understand sort of what you are expecting and what you're getting.
And I think that we've gotten to a place, and maybe we were already in a place where the performative was given more weight than maybe the actuals. Like in the 90s, these restaurants in New York that were so delicious and around the world where they were like stacking things up and making these complicated plates, and there was
And opening the bell, and then there was nothing, and then they were poor.
Yeah, but the
And
90s
this is like
in Mexico, late 90s in Mexico were like molecular gastronomy.
Yeah.
Correct.
It was, it was fine dining.
And it's okay, but after a while you realize that your stomach hurts.
But I
and
love
it's
that-
not what I want every day. As a kid in New York, I moved to New York when I was very young, and I would have these lists of all these restaurants because I was obsessed with the idea of food and like how it's presented. And I would keep my list, and I couldn't afford it. So when my parents would come, either one, I would make all these reservations, and I would do whatever I could to get these reservations. And I was 22 and like talking about Bolud, and like it was amazing to get into Bolud and smell the apples, and like that experience for me was like theater, and it was very important. But there's something changed. Union Square Cafe started happening.
Yeah.
Madame Alice Waters that were like all in awe of. That thing started getting simple. And simple eating with delicious products.
I mean, Alice Waters has had Chez Panisse for over 50 years.
I know, but she didn't get the recognition for.
Yeah.
Something clicked after
Yeah.
a while, don't you think?
I think totally. And I find it so fascinating. And in terms of trends that you guys know all about, I do find it fascinating that sort of the food world and like the trendiness in food has catched up with Contramar in a way.
Exactly.
Contramar was always just made with very basic core values of my food, which was Italian background, simple, few ingredients,
Focus on
straightforward,
quality.
Consistent.
consistent
Not always.
in homes is usual, but consistent in restaurants is really difficult.
I can't imagine. Yeah.
Really difficult.
And consistency in experience and waiters and things like. I mean, that's one of the big things I think about Contramar as well, and maybe we're getting there too soon. But I think something that was always so special about it was this feeling that the service was so good and so welcoming and warm and easy and unfussy. And
but on point, like very few
perfect.
places in the world.
Yeah.
Like
And-
the speed and the way they're serving, they're watching, they're not pushing, but they're always there. You can.
they're really
just, like,
taking care of you. I mean, they really
And
are making sure that
so
you are
feel
having
really
the best
pampered.
time.
I think service is the most outstanding part of Contramar.
It's super
actually.
difficult. Huh?
But again, here I need to go back to this. I loved your concept of how when you have what you were saying, Rudy, when you have a low budget, you really need to distill your concept. You really need to focus on the few things that you can't not have. And for us, one of those things was, the things were, of course, high quality, but good service. Good service because even though the restaurant was going to be a relaxed atmosphere because we could not afford another one, and I don't know if we would have done a fancy restaurant if we would have been able to afford it, because it wasn't really the point. The point was to make a palapa, like
cantina.
a beach palapa on, how you eat on the beach, but in like right there on the street in that big bodega.
On the Sea of Durango.
In Guatemala, we don't have fancy beach places. It's just not something that exists. We have nice beaches, both Pacific and Atlantic. But if you want to go out for dinner or lunch, there wasn't, as a growing up, a concept of restaurant. There was la cevicheria. And you knew who was la cevichera or el cevichero that had the freshest fish. And they would tell you, no, something just came in from the port. And Doña X is going to have it. There's a seaside town in Guatemala called Livingston, which is one of the few places in Guatemala with an Afro-Guatemalan community. And then there was La Tía Helen. And so when you get to there, they would say, La Tía Helen, le llegaron las langostas. The lobsters came.
Yeah.
We would literally run to La Tía Helen. And La Tía Helen would serve the lobsters on plastic trays.
Yeah.
And they were so big. And it was just like, they were perfect. And just like a little bit of butter.
Oof.
And it was just the most delicious, but extremely humble.
Yes.
The environment.
Yes.
And it was the same with the cevicherias.
Yes.
It was the same with all these places that I grew up with. And I think in California, you also had the fish shack.
Well, and fish tacos. I mean, the connection.
But everywhere in the world, I think every beach side has the simple, just fresh out of the ocean.
Has a direct way,
which is what I want to find.
Or in the
a lobster roll.
A lobster, exactly.
I don't want to find the
Oysters.
elevated. I don't want to find the fancy. I want to find La Tía Helen wherever I go.
Totally, but this is something that now is a trend.
Yeah.
Now it's happening.
Cities.
But you guys were doing it before that. And that's what I think kind of created the desire to go there, because you were having something that was super elevated. You cannot deny that the things are super delicious. The products are elevated, the service is so good, but it's stripped down of all the kind of other pretenses that usually come along with elevated dining. So it's like
and it
direct.
Appealed to this crowd or this community that was also really changing in Mexico. Curimansuto hadn't even opened. But it was there, like contemporary
and
art.
Mako was coming.
And Mako was...
Humix was starting. I mean, Raman and I talk about it always, like 98, 2000, with this transformative moment for Mexico.
Yeah.
Because for us, we're not Mexican, but we've been looking at Mexico and coming to Mexico and working in Mexico and having Mexican friends and talking about Mexico in a way, from Guatemala, we look up to Mexico, like our content, our media, so many things that we looked at as kids was Mexican. Our television, Timbiriche, all these things. And Rodman grew up with a family that lived in Mexico for a while. So for us, it was like this imaginary of Mexico. And in the art world.
It was the coolest Mexico. Because for Californians who knew Tasco, Cuernavaca, Acapulco, Chapala, and Mexico City. I mean, Mexico has been a very cosmopolitan city for anybody, for people in the art
for
community.
Creative people,
for Guatemalans, when you wanted
people
like
in textile, in design, and
in Mexico, you had this dinner theater in the 80s where you would go have dinner and then there would be a performance. Like, I don't know if you remember, like Dulce or Lupita D'Alessio.
Yes.
You would go, it was very fancy, usually in the South. It was a very big banquet hall, and then there was a concert. Guatemalans would come just for that. So my grandparents would come, my parents would come for like this amazing night out in Mexico City. So for us, it was always the cosmopolitan city of Latin America. And then you see the changes of the contemporary world, contemporary art, contemporary media seeping into Mexico. And this change, that what you mentioned is so important. Los Curis capture something really important.
Super important.
And they do it in a way that it's for us. We've known them. It's funny. I knew them in school in the 90s when they were at Columbia University. I was there also. Jose was studying there. Yeah. He was at CIPA and we met.
And
then
that's
they
when
came
Monica
here.
started working at Marion Goodman.
Correct. And then we came to Mexico when they opened their first gallery in this tiny little apartment, and we show the first little lacquer show and these things. And Rama and I looked at each other. We're like, okay, something's happening here. There's like a lightning in the bottle. Like, these two are incredible. And like the artists they're finding and the conversation they're starting is very important. And then
especially for the outside world to look at Mexico.
Correct.
Because
in a different way.
It wasn't anything that Mexicans didn't know was happening, but you needed to be in the know. You needed to be somebody.
You need the amplification because these are small worlds and you need everyone to look at.
Weirdly, in my mind, that's what Contramar was and is. It was a magazine. Like, I know it's a restaurant and I know like it's about food, but in a weird way for me, Contramar was like the amplifier of all these things happening, and the door opener for so many people that were coming to Mexico, so many foreigners, so many gallers that were coming for their first maco, for their first this, the first that. Everyone would gravitate to this place where you would mix and you would see things. So you would see that this is, Miguel Calderon, the artist that we're all talking about, blah, blah, blah. He's sitting there, and across from him is Monica and Jose and blah, blah, blah. In a weird way, it exists and existed for me in this other format. Like, yes, it was a restaurant. We were going there, but it was also this like...
For me, it was about conversation.
It was like a platform.
For me, it was about conversation. For me, it was meeting Rodrigo Peñafiel sitting at the bar and being introduced to Rodrigo and being, who is this person and how amazing is he? But, I met him at Contramar. And then I met all these artists at Contramar. And then we started making friends at Contramar. And so it's all those things, but it's also about conversation and coming back to that, right? It's coming back to having a place that is the closest thing to a canteen where you're also building community. That
feels that you could go there every day, that is yours, that people have appropriated it.
No matter what, I always felt like no matter what, Fridays are a particular topic. That's a whole other topic.
That's a whole other topic.
Any other day of the week, I felt like if I didn't have a plan or I didn't know what I was going to do, I could just walk over to Contramar and I would run into people that I wanted to see.
Or if not, you would just have the most delicious food and be grateful that you're in Mexico.
That never happened for me. I always would run into someone that I wanted to see. I mean, it was part of the food, of course, is so great, but it was also just knowing that no matter what, I would run into someone that would then create an adventure for the rest of the day, or like, I don't know, it's like an instigate. There's something about that thing that it's just beyond going to a restaurant.
I find like that, we have to look at also the other side, where some people sometimes can be critical of the fact that you become this juggernaut that attracts all these foreigners, right? Because that's also that people talk about. And I think being an amplifier and having that place is so important. And that's where I think that opening up literally your imaginary borders to everyone, right? Because we're like people that live everywhere and we go everywhere and we feel everything. And we're like, we don't think about where people are from or why they're where they are, because we think that life magically brings you to places. So for me, having that place to bring people together is very important.
And you know what? Not to be pretentious, but I think that the capacity to make Contramar was actually my being from everywhere. My being half Italian, having spent so much time in the United States, like being being Mexican, but looking at Mexico because I want to talk about this with you guys. Don't you think that, in Mexico, we have so much, we have so many resources. Culturally, it's endless. Artistically, you can't stop. But so many times, cultures need the outside look to actually...
In a way that is not patriarchal, but in a way that it's celebratory.
Totally.
The Albers would have never made or built what they did without Mexico.
Totally.
Marfa, do you know the story that Judd wanted to be in Mexico? Have you ever been told?
But yes.
So Judd was obsessed with the idea of creating something like Marfa.
By the way, I am finally going to go to Marfa.
Oh my God, it's about
in
time.
October.
Oh my God, it's about time.
It's the best time to go.
Are you going to be there?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe I should go. Maybe we can go with you. Well, yes. My answer is always
anyway,
yes.
I've never been to Marfa. I was telling that.
So Donald Judd, one of the most important American artists of the mid-century, really wanted to build a place to make his work, but also, again, community, amplification, and conversation, right? Yeah. Which is so important. He really wanted to do it in Mexico because he felt the connection for many reasons. Yep. And they told him that for tax reasons, for legal reasons, for all these reasons, everyone said you shouldn't go, it's too complicated. So he found a place the closest he could to Mexico. So his connection to being in Marfa is not just Marfa because it's so remote, but because he was close to Mexico.
Yeah.
And so many of us, I think, and I think you agree, love, admire, and respect Mexico because it's all those things that you mentioned, and because sometimes you don't see what's in front of you.
Because you just take it for granted. This is the most human of things.
Or it's just, you take it for granted.
There's all these stereotypes. All cultures have stereotypes kind of from people from the outside. You have stereotypes on the inside about who you are and what you represent. people have stereotypes about who you are and what you represent from the outside as well. And so we all are carrying around those baggages, and countries carry around those baggages.
Totally.
And I think for me, one of the really important things about Contramar, and then a bunch of the restaurants that came after and with you as well, is that they provided a way for a lot of people that didn't have an access through the language or through the art or some other connection with Mexico to really understand the sophistication that is here. And this kind of combination of really sophisticated and really simple at the same time, this kind of wabi-sabi that feels really intrinsic to me, to Mexico. Like, I just feel it all the time between architecture and design and food. But I think restaurants, because we've become so focused on food internationally, like everybody just talks about food and goes to restaurants. That's what we do for socializing today and for talking. It became a really easy way to get people to understand what Mexico really was, and that Mexico wasn't Taco Bell, hard taco shell, cheese, blah, 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 like all these kind of stereotypes that exist outside and have been, also promoted through the media and blah, blah, blah. It's been such a great way of, I think, changing the global perception of this incredible city and how truly cosmopolitan it is.
And have you ever thought about this? But for me, Mexico is very close to
lovely.
Japanese culture.
So close.
Like, for me, Mexico City and Tokyo. So like when people say like the Japanese, which, one of my favorite places in the world, and they have to like push me into the airplane to leave Japan because everything is so sensorial and overwhelming, and processes, right? Like the processes of everything, like if you pay attention, are great. Mexico is very similar in how all of their processes are very specific. And they look different, but the way you eat a taco, the way you're served a taco, like when I,
but in a very different culture.
Well, it's in a crash,
but there are all these codes.
All these codes.
It's a very different
as in
code.
every culture.
Yeah. And so it's a little
you have
bit
all
more
these codes that if you don't really know, you are so out of.
But you also have ways to do everything, and serve everything, and how you. It's funny.
Or you don't eat something in the morning, you eat it in the afternoon.
Or when people say like, "How do you eat a taco?"
This
I'm like, "What do you mean? How do you eat a taco? Isn't it obvious?" And it's not. Or
It's
like
not.
a torta, or like, So I think like if you start paying attention to like the way that things are done here, like it's very much a tradition that comes from many years, and I think that's also very beautiful. That is very much alive in everything, especially when you walk around. So I don't know if you ever noticed, like the garages here, like there's someone with a flag outside asking you. They're usually sitting in chairs that they've put together themselves.
Yes.
They're not pretty.
No.
They're usually the smartest objects that they've haphazardly put together from things they picked on the street. And someone like
Are you documenting those?
Fabian Capello, for example.
Oof.
has done a whole investigation and visual and has presented things of these chairs that actually work, but it's things that people pick up and they put together and they
the ingenuity that's inherent in this culture is so incredible and so visual.
Because we're super fast. Latinos and especially like Mexicans with a sense of humor.
Mexican innovation. Richard Hart, the baker. It was fascinated by that. It's like, okay, something breaks. You tie it up, you put whatever you
Chapuceado, no? Chapuceado, but it works.
Yeah. But you have it. Like, you don't need to order it and get the new one. And like, things don't stop.
You just keep moving forward.
But anyway, these chairs, yes.
So the chairs are the idea that like there's also a thread in Mexico of how like things get made, things get put together. It's very poetic. For me, it's very poetic. That you
totally
resuelves.
Yes.
You make do with what you find and what you can for what you need.
Yeah.
And it starts becoming...
And this improvisation...
A lot of improvisation.
...is wonderful.
Well, think about the sense of humor.
The creative part is extraordinary.
Something for Brahmins...
But it can also be very frustrating for foreigners.
Yes.
Especially because it's so
like
difficult
Japan,
to...
like Paris,
locals.
like France, because it's about codes that you need to adapt. They're not going to adapt to you because you shouldn't come here thinking people should do. But like the Mexican albur, which is...
Yes.
Albur is the way people respond in conversation, usually with sexual undertones that are very funny. Like for Rodman, he didn't realize at the beginning that whatever you say in Mexico, it will be used against you if you're not careful, in a way that you're like, how did they come up with that, right? And that, to do proper alburear, to be very fast at that, you have to be super smart. And
super smart. Super smart.
That shows you how the brain is going.
Totally.
You're finding solutions.
Totally.
And that's how I see the brain here. It's like people are always finding solutions with what they have. So if you say something and you're not even noticing that you're putting yourself up, like Radman one day, Radman said, quiero mi chaqueta. No, chaqueta is in Guatemala, we call chaqueta the
La
jacket.
chamarra.
Like, here, chaqueta is a hand job. It's a hand job. So Radman in the middle of the party said, I want a hand job. And people were like laughing hysterically.
Well, it was probably kind of true on both bases.
Even though you didn't realize what you were saying.
Sometimes subliminally things just come out.
I just had to say to Radman, you have to be very precise with language and how you say things, because if not, I mean, it'll come back to you.
Hence an English language podcast.
But I think that's how you...
Good.
But that's the connection that I'm trying to make of how people are always thinking and putting things together and responding. Responding is very important. I need a chair. I'm going to find a chair. I'm going to get a chair. I can't find it. I'm going to make a chair with whatever I find. And I think that starts creating situations that are really beautiful. It
comes back to that earlier thing that you were saying, or that earlier topic that we were saying, that when there's less of something, you know, when you have less of something, you're figuring out how to do
more.
So then the essential
is
like, what really shines.
Exactly. And solution oriented. Rudy and I work so much with architects, and one of our favorite architects is this guy, Tom Kundig from Seattle, that we've been doing projects with 15 years or more. And there's always a moment in the process of designing a building or something where he'll look at a problem that we're trying to resolve that's like complicated, and you know, architects can like over design and engineer and like to get from point A to point B, they'll go to like M or F, and Tom will look at something and be like, well, what would a farmer do? And it's such a good way of looking at problem solving, because it's like, what's the most economical way to get this resolution, this solution? How do you get from here to there? Even when you have a lot of abundance, even when you have a lot of things at your disposal that you can deploy, maybe you set those things aside and you actually focus on what's the essential way of getting from A to B. So
Contramar is like, what would a fishmonger do?
Yeah, like
a fishmonger will get the freshest, most delicious and serve it. You know, and that's the essence of what you do.
That's why it works so well. And that's why I think it hasn't needed to be rethought or, you know, become something else. It's always been about this really essential thing, which is like something delicious, something fresh, something nicely served, not overdone. Like there's nothing about it that's too much.
Yeah.
The only thing that's too much that we haven't talked about is the dessert.
Well, it's only because we eat too much of
it.
Because
every time I'm like, I'm not going to do dessert today, and I cannot not do it. The tray is ridiculous.
Everybody's like, oh my God, the tray, it's so great. And the pictures, it looks so good. I was like, this is the whole point of the tray. Like the dessert
can't say
tray.
No.
But everybody, like, this is an old school restaurant tradition.
Absolutely.
You have a dessert tray.
What would a restaurateur do? What would a traditional restaurateur do?
Or what things have worked in the world. But also, you know, I think a really interesting and important part of Contramar's story. And yes, it was appealing to this art community that I was a part of, that I came from. And you know, I was going to be a part of Ribansuto when it opened.
I did not.
But I decided to keep Contramar.
Really?
Thank you. Good choice.
You know what Gabriel Orozco said? Tocaya, hay 1000 galerías en el mundo. No hay un Contramar.
He was right.
I know. I'm so grateful.
It's an amazing thing.
It really is.
You would have been a good gallerist too.
I know, but you know what? I thought I was going to be that. I thought I was going to be a curator, an art curator. And I wanted to do contemporary art, of course. And I would always tell my mom in art conferences, like, you know, and everywhere. I was like, I'm going to do contemporary because people in contemporary just dress so much better.
Back.
Whatever, but Japanese.
Talk about people catching up. They've been wearing Icey Miyake for 40 years, and now like
it was like you've been eating at Contramar for 25, and it's still good. Good things are still good.
Kurimansuto needed Contramar, they needed Jumex. You know, that's
no. We all needed each other, but because
you all grew up into this.
But because this is what I was going to say, the element that we're missing is that social media came.
That's very interesting.
And globalization and people being able to see this very, very easily. It wasn't that you found out about it in an article in the New York Times or Architectural Digest or in the
Word of mouth.
No,
It was more like immediate.
it was word of mouth, which was super important. But then the massive outreach of social media is this, I think, this other element.
Well, that becomes like your dessert tray. Like in a way, like it's the same. You can't say no.
Like Mexico City became like a phenomenon. Because this is what happens. It's
COVID,
like the next.
And we cannot forget what COVID did. It augmented everything times 1,000, right? So
which is one of the really good things that happened in this country.
We started coming in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
But for work. I mean, I used to come as a kid, so they're relevant, but like, coming as adults in our 20s.
Yeah.
In the 90s, Mexico was not as international. It's always been cosmopolitan, but not international.
Totally.
Same way as Sao Paulo, that is cosmopolitan, but not international. And especially the last 8 years, there's been this incredible growth that, again, comes with problems, right? Like some people are happy, some people are not. You do hear a lot of English in Condesa and now
so much.
And
Really
I understand how it can be a moment of processing what it means. No, but a lot of the cities have always had the international aspect of it. And if you welcome, especially the people that add things, right? Not the people that take things. People can add things to cities like this. And then Mexico now it's crazy how it's on everyone's radar, top of mind.
And it's also, you can't ever just take. If you go somewhere, you also give something. And
we're exchange, right? Because exchange is the most important, which is what happens on Contramar.
Yes.
It's an exchange of energy, of food, of conversation. So that exchange is what makes it so important. And then coming to Mexico, there's an exchange of ideas.
Totally.
Going back to the Alberts coming to see Diego Rivera, that is important. And that's what changes. That has implications in history.
Totally.
No?
No, I would agree. I think that there's this really important. There will be a book written about what happened here in the late 90s and the early 20th century in the formation of what's now
early
like
21st century.
21st century. No, early 21st century. Yeah, exactly. Sorry.
He's terrible with numbers.
Me too.
I'm such a dyslexic with all things. But I think there'll be this book that's going to talk about why we're in what Mexico is today. And I think what Mexico is today is this combination of a lot of factors, but a big part of that is coming back to those early pillars of Maco, Jumex.
We forgot Maco. Maco is so important.
Maco, Jumex, the Curis, Contramar, creating this structure that allowed for a particular international community to have access to the city and to fall in love with the city and then to leave the city and tell everybody else about the city. And it just kept growing and growing and growing.
Usually that crowd is the crowd that is influential.
Totally.
They were the
without
real
using the word influencer.
No, but
it's a different
influencers
thing.
Did not exist
At all.
because there were people who actually influenced trends.
And now it's a career to be an influencer.
But there always were people. I mean, Frida Kahlo.
Yeah, exactly. No. There was Frida and Diego, and there was bringing
Frida Kahlo
on
the cover of Vogue in 1940. What was it?
When were they in New York? 40s, let's say early 40s. So, but I think it's been a different thing that rather than just being exported, like going outside and being something exotic, like this kind of like exoticism, this is the art world. We look at it with Miami too, because we spent all this time in Miami and we've been connected to Art Basel and Design Miami.
And Raman Rand Design Miami.
And looking at the change in the city.
Yes, I was going to say, you missed out on that part in your introduction.
So there's a lot of things that we could introduce. But I would say that when someone writes the history of Miami Beach, there's this really pivotal moment where a number of collectors invite Art Basel to come to the city, and it changes the city forever. It really changes the city forever. And although maybe the impact of Maco inside the city and this world feels kind of small because it's an enormous city, and when that happens, it feels small. I think the impact and what it did for Mexico and Mexico City in terms of becoming an international city is super essential. And it's that combination of those factors and the power of culture to create energy and to bring investment both literal investment in terms of money,
And-
but
and-
also
and cap- and
emotional
mental
and capital and like all of those things.
Completely.
Yes, and
it's
it's
like
it's
alchemy.
interesting because, like, you know, when we think about art and Latin American art, there's the Latin American art department at auction houses, and you know, people want to talk about Latin American art, and it really bothers a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because art is art, regardless.
Yeah.
When you start uniting these
Yeah.
worlds, you start losing that
Yeah.
title. you
And
know?
that's what's happened in Mexico.
and that's
Mexico has become another city in this circuit of cities
of art.
that
Of art
Art,
and culture, it's London, it's New
And
York,
food.
it's Mexico.
and now I think actually Mexico City is
Absolutely.
the most interesting city to be cooking in.
Absolutely.
I mean,
And eating in.
and
We
eating,
had- we had dinner-
eating in for sure.
We-
Eating in more so.
We had dinner
than
at
cooking
this restaurant of this young Mexican chef that lived in New York for many years, and it just opened 3 months ago in Mexico. And
Which
I went
is?
out to her,
Kana.
Cana?
Yeah, and
I've heard of it. I've
You gotta
never
go.
been.
so
It's really
Sarde,
good.
have you been to Sarde?
not yet.
Not yet.
Anyway, there are all these
But I
little
went up
places.
to her. But I went up to her and I said, "Why are you here and not New York? Because in New York, you know, you can make
There's
because
so
you were there
many
already." And she
reasons
looked
for
at me.
her.
She said, "I'm Mexican.
Yeah,
I want to be here."
yeah.
And she created an international bistro that's perfectly well cooked, don't you think?
Oh, everything's delicious.
And I think it's exciting.
I love
so
it. I love
this
it.
ecosystem of
And
people that are
Hugo,
oh,
and
absolutely.
like all these
so
Americans,
Martinez and
but all
the-
these people. And I remember, yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
But no, but I think that's very important because you start
Yes.
creating this conversation of it's great food, period. It's not Latin American
Yeah.
food. It's
Yeah.
great art, period.
I remember having this conversation with several chefs in the early 2000s, and like Hugo da Costa, who was making Mexican wines, right? After being in Italy and France for so long, and Spain, whatever. And I remember telling them, you know, when Mexicans who've been cooking in the United States start coming back and cooking here, then that's going to really change things.
And it's happening.
And it happened.
Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
happening like all
It's
the way.
amazing.
Because also it's so difficult to find this genuine desire to like help and serve. And this Mexican, and this is what Contramar did have. Like in Mexico, we have professional servers. People actually can live their lives. Like,
It's a
you know,
career.
it's a
that
career.
you're
They
proud
they
of.
can support their kids going to university by being professional servers. So I wanted professional servers. I did not want kids that were like trying to be cool.
That didn't want to do it.
or
Yeah.
want to be actors.
Or they don't
Yeah.
understand food or don't
Right.
care about food.
And this is why in Cala I hired people with a conviction history that didn't have other opportunities, because I wanted their job at Cala to be a good opportunity, not like their third or fourth.
In the meantime,
Yeah.
And I think in the United States and in the first world countries in general, and that is such a like 70s term, but in rich cities, we're going to have to, or in cities with discrepancies between those who have and those who don't, we're going to have to find means of integrating, you know, services
where
to,
it's a decent living.
with social work.
Where it becomes a decent living.
Yes,
And
because
people
also
are starting
we-
to do it.
because we need that, we want that, and you can't expect to not pay for good things.
Did you read?
Because this is why there are so many rich people in the world, because we want to have everything and not pay for it.
Matt Stone and
Or,
Trey
you know,
Parker. Matt Stone and Trey Parker. That they did the cartoon
South Park.
South
Yes,
Park.
yes.
They're opening up a restaurant. They're doing away with tips, but they're doing super high hourly wages.
Which is what I did in Cala. I did that in Cala in 2015 in San Francisco. And it was super forward at the time.
And
But
it-
it's what needs to happen.
and it needs to happen to also appreciate the people throughout the chain.
I
that
mean,
does
the
that.
whole
You
chain.
know,
It's
I mean, look at
appreciating the
you.
chain.
You work with all sorts of crafts and artisans and
Makers.
makers. I mean, to do things well.
It takes, well, there's a couple things. It takes so much to do things well, but then I think it also takes a lot to try to get the world to remove the hierarchies that we've placed in them,
Yes.
to understand that because something's seen at Gagosian versus seen at a market, like there can be no difference between those things.
We
Something
wanna
that's
break
really
it-
beautifully executed is really beautifully executed. Something that's really wonderful, it's wonderful, period. Not because of the bag it comes in or the shop it's necessarily come from, but because of its intrinsic value. And that is a conversation that I think we're starting to have all over the
Do you
world.
know
And it
Marcela
relates to your food, too.
Calderón from Taller 36?
Yes.
Okay, so I interviewed her yesterday.
Okay.
And we spent about an hour and a half talking. And obviously I like to talk, so we're going to spend
You
another 3.
talk?
She's from Michoacan, grew up in Michoacan. And she was telling me about the process, the millenary process, hundreds of years, the history of how things are made and done, and how you bring out the earth and the colors and why things are done the way they are. And we went on and on and on. And she goes back and forth between history and today, because there's something that it's informing where we are today, right? And so I go back to what Raman was talking about, which is art, a big wall, right? Design, a big wall, handicraft or craft, right? And I'm like, that lady Michoacan is an artist of incredible talent and dedication. And you cannot belittle what she does by just calling it a craft, not knowing her name and not paying for it. Breaking those walls and coming up with a way to talk about this.
Yeah.
That it's all about creators and makers. We call them makers rather than I love the word maker, but it's people that do things, come up with things. You have your makers. They're making your desserts are makers. These are really talented, creative
Totally,
minds.
and it's a craft, and it's a thing that you have to do. I mean,
Don't belittle
and
them.
my point though is sort of like, you don't have to, that thing that's made in Michoacan, that object that's made in Michoacan, it doesn't have to be in our gallery. It doesn't have to be super expensive for it to be valued. Like I'm trying to figure out, I think we're all trying to figure out ways of getting people to have the tools to look at something and be able to say like, that is so beautiful and amazing at $5, just like that is beautiful and amazing at $5 million. And it's not the price point or the zeros or the commas behind those numbers that make it valuable. It has an intrinsic value,
or make it beautiful, right?
or balance. One of the most elegant women, Marela Agnelli, who already passed away, had the most beautiful houses, and she really valued and treasured the high and the lows. We were lucky that we went to see her house in Marrakesh, that the family allowed us to see it, just to see what it looked like. And the most beautiful part is how there's not that hierarchy, that doesn't exist. But Radman tells a story of Radman worked in their apartment when he was like very junior assistant. And she would always have a paper lantern from Canal Street that is $30 in the living room. It gave the perfect light. It looks so beautiful in the room, but it wasn't a fancy, expensive antique.
Yeah.
But its value and its beauty is just as high and valuable and great.
There was a suite of Matisses on the wall in that sitting room, this incredibly important suite of paintings and all these amazing things. But throughout that apartment, and it's always stayed with me, is there were all these things that were beautiful just because they were beautiful. They were not branded. They weren't necessarily important. There were chairs that were threadbare, but the fabric was so beautiful, this old, beautiful fabric that, it was okay that it was ripping because it was truly beautiful. And I think we're always trying to get people to get to a place where they can actually really love objects and see beauty for what beauty is. It doesn't have to be how I'm seeing it, but how each of us see it, and actually have the confidence and the love to love those things and not need all these kind of mediating things of, brands and other things to make those things important or beautiful for them.
And the same is for a tortilla and a ceviche.
Exactly. No, it's exact same thing.
It's the exact same thing. A great ceviche does not need to have a French preparation.
Totally. And a good tortilla or good bread. I mean, maybe bread is a little bit more sophisticated. And tortillas also. Tortillas also.
And there's differences between tamales. There's those tamales that feel like heavy and dry and like a brick that aren't good, and then there are those tamales that are
feel like you're
like a dream, like it's heaven. Like
our tortillas in Guatemala are very different than Salvadorian tortillas.
Yes.
Even like how thick they are and how they're made, and
like these
it's the tradition.
subtleties.
Great subtleties, but it goes again to it's water and masa de maíz. It's corn. I mean,
But it's again like it's the corn. It's the different kind of corn and where it came from and how it was milled and all those things. And you can go down all these rabbit holes about all of that, and have this extraordinary, tortilla that Enrique made, at Tetitlan or something. There's different things. Or you can also have one on the street that's incredible.
And that's beautiful.
That has been made the way it has to be made.
And that's a paper lantern. Right, totally. The most delicious tortilla.
Yeah.
I
put in the tortilla, and it mixed your argument. You were going on an argument.
No, the argument is that the high and the low, and like the simplicity and the beauty of it, right? There was once, what was his name on CNN that talked about food that sadly passed away?
Anthony Bourdain.
But Anthony Bourdain did a show on chicharrones.
Yes.
It's my favorite thing in the world.
I haven't seen that one. Chicharrones everywhere in the world.
And no. He traveled around the world. He
Yes.
did chicharrones, and he was in Guatemala.
Oof.
And I was living in Guatemala at the time. And it was on the side of the road in Antigua, which is the old colonial capital,
Yes.
capital. I got in my car and went to try the chicharrones.
Thanks,
They were the
thanks
most
to Anthony Bourdain pointing them out to you.
to the Guatemalan.
And
there
doing
were like
basically that
3
same
bats
thing.
of oil. There were 3 bats of oil when they would make the chicharrones. They still make them today. Whenever people come to Guatemala, I'll drive an hour just for them to try the chicharrones. It's so simple, but there's something about the recipe. There's something about how they do chicharrones that they're the best chicharrones in the world.
But he was doing that same thing that we're talking about in terms of beauty, of trying to like flatten or remove these hierarchies,
was-
and that like
But
delicious things are
I think
everywhere.
Americans really did that to the world.
The flattening.
The opening up the barriers,
The opening,
like well,
Anthony
you-
Bourdain, these programs, and
Julia Child, Diana
Ch-
Kennedy, like all
but
of these
Julia
voices.
Child, like everybody can cook, like on TV for everyone. Like it was a
And if you didn't, it was
democratization.
okay. When it didn't work, she would laugh and she's like, "Oh, that didn't work."
Yeah.
And then she would do it again.
Yeah. But it's like the high-low meet. I mean, I think high-low has always met. In fashion,
Yes.
high and low have always
Yes.
been like at the edge and the top of creativity
Yes.
and
And it's
invention.
a place of
One
confidence.
because of extra resources, the other because of lack of resources. But creativity and invention in really wonderful aesthetic ways. But the putting that like as a culture, making that your flagship,
your calling card, your
yeah,
foundation.
like the way your establishment, right? It's like everything is fine as long as you work in the United States. You're right. This is your country. You're a citizen. Whatever. That's how it was established, and I think that came to now make us be able to be much more relaxed about food, which is not that the French didn't ever relax about food because they always had the high and the low,
Mhm.
but high French was
Is.
high French, still is. But even that, I think, has been influenced by this American way of just relax. Like
Yeah, like Danny Meyer.
where
Danny Meyer with Union Square Cafe. Like I remember the first time. It's so
Danny
simple.
Meyer was another advocate for service included. It didn't really work because it was really hard for
But
the
the
servers.
service at his restaurants are
Amazing.
usually impeccable.
And Shake Shack is amazing because Danny Myers is a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because they focused on doing a few things and doing them very, very well.
But again, it's this. Everybody in the world is wearing sneakers.
And jeans.
And jeans. Thanks to the United States of America that made this the workers' clothes, everybody's clothes. And it was okay, let's not be communist, but actually let's all dress the same.
And let's elevate some of the basic things about human existence, which is that we all work.
Yeah.
And then
that
the Japanese-
we can
And then the
celebrate that.
Japanese took jeans and made them better.
Well, because they make everything better. They
Japanese
honestly
make
make everything better.
everything better.
And now they have the most beautiful, like, like it's
The
just
best.
incredible. Like they just take it to another level.
Everything.
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 Sadly, they don't
Everything.
make them in my size, but.
But I agree that craft and that Japanese and Mexican cultures have so
There's
many.
somewhere where they meet.
I wanna know if either of you remember the first day you went to Contramar.
I don't
The first
remember my
time.
first day, but I remember very specifically, not my first day, but going to Contramar during Mako with a colleague of mine that was meeting a kind of clandestine boyfriend. And we were having lunch together there and sitting down and having this amazing, fun, really fun, long, typical Contramar probably Friday lunch. And at a certain point, looking at these two people and realizing like, oh, no. They are falling in love right now at this table. And they're married now and they have a child and their whole life, they exploded their lives to create this life together. And it's such a strong memory of being there.
Too many carajillos.
Yeah, or not enough, whatever. But it definitely wasn't the first. It was like probably 5 years into going to Contramar, but it's probably one of my favorite memories because it was something also about the magic of that moment. They were so in love with being there, being in Mexico, being with each other, that you could feel that there was something like alchemaic happening at that table, over a tostada and then, whatever, a fig tart. But I just could feel it, and I've never forgotten it.
I don't remember the first time. I remember the first times. So the beginning of going back and back and back. One thing that I'll be very quick to touch upon, one of the hardest things for us to understand was the timing of lunch for Mexicans. So starting at 3, going till 9, it was an exercise of meditation and patience, because I get hungry at like 1.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time we get invited for Friday lunch, and it was like 3 p.m. You start eating at 3:34.
And people arrive late because they're all
so you start
in
eating at
traffic.
4, and then it's 9 p.m. And of course, we are like the American mentality of like, and we have other meetings and we have other things. So that's one thing that's
well, there were years when we used to come, and we would always have lunch on Friday with this group of friends, and we got to a point where we would like eat for a while and then leave, and then come back. And then eat again, and then go leave. We'd have like 3 rounds of errands in the middle of
go to a gallery, come back, they were still there. We would go buy something, come back, they were still there. And that's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
It's the most enjoyable, crazy long lunch.
But it's true. It is. The place became very special. That place became very special.
And it just became like home. Like it. I think for a lot of people that you're going to talk to, the next 25 people, they're going to say the same thing, that it is an extension of home. Or it is, you feel like you're at home. I remember coming and going to like these kind of elaborate, overdone meals and being like, oh, and then going to people's houses. Like the best thing for me, because of Christie's and because of like, we were being invited to people's houses to see their collections and blah, 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 would be if they invited us for lunch. And then we would have amazing things because it was home. Sopa seca.
It's the most delicious thing in the world.
Budina azteca.
And everyone has their sopa seca recipe at home.
Yes.
And when it's properly served.
One is with chile morita, the other one is with chile.
Aguacate.
Yes, the other one is with chile ancho, the other one is with chipotle. Aguacate,
no tanto
crema,
chipotle
no tanto
porque lo
chipotle.
matas,
Queso seco o queso fresco. Yeah.
For me, like sopa seca is to die for.
With an Italian mother growing up in Mexico was like, how could that be called pasta?
The overcooked, like the wilted pasta.
Italians kill for al dente.
No, they like it hard. Barely, they call it al dente. I'm like, it's uncooked.
This is the wrong. I have criticized many young chefs who are like, this is al dente. I was like, that's the wrong side of al dente.
That's like still in the box, al dente.
Yes. But yes, good food and celebrating what's really good and delicious. I think
family
and community.
I think it's creativity and community that really bonds us.
And you two are great at doing that.
No, stop.
You are.
Well, we're good eaters.
Thank you.
Congratulations
you so
on 25 years.
Thank you.
25 more.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's just keep on having fun.
Let's keep it going.
Yeah. Totally.
Congrats.
But thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.